I'm Richard Gisbert, and you're at The Listening Post. This week, bird flu, then and now. Viacom and YouTube. Now, is that any way to negotiate? Another outbreak of celebrity racism hits the media. This time, Paris Hilton stands accused. And super scary, Fragilistic Mary. We'll explain that one later. Welcome back to The Listening Post, Al Jazeera's eyes and ears on global media. The bird flu story has been getting a lot of play on the world's front pages. The news map from Maremouchi.com sizes and color codes stories depending on how much coverage they're getting. And as you can see, bird flu is very big news in Europe. The UK papers reporting on the ban on poultry imports, and in France, where it's called grippe aviaire, they too are reporting on new precautions to stop the infection from spreading. But the coverage of the story is markedly different to what we saw last year when some of the reporting on bird flu verged on the apocalyptic. That's our starting point this week, the difficulties in covering a complicated and potentially very big story.
In Nigeria, officials say H5N1 killed a young woman who contracted the disease in January. Japan is using a drill today to test emergency readiness to deal with a human case of bird flu.
In Hungary, there were a couple of outbreaks of this particular deadly strain.
There are already confirmed cases in half a dozen European countries, including France, Germany, and Italy.
The first carcasses moved from here yesterday were of birds that had been in the infected shed.
In Italy, poultry sales have dropped 70%.
What to believe when the reporting sometimes confuses rather than informs.
Good morning, Robin. Fears of bird flu have now reached a fever pitch here.
Even though scientists running these human trials see no evidence it will become the pandemic everyone fears.
And those two reports were on the same network.
If there is no threat to human health, why is this exclusion zone being created? Why?
One of the problems, most journalists lack a scientific background.
Well, it's difficult because it's scientific and it's complex science. How does a virus mutate? What are the chances of that happening? And when you're talking about an entirely random act, it's very difficult for a journalist who likes to draw comparisons to tell that story, and they have to find ways to do it. It's up to the journalist to explain the difference between the threat to humans and the threat to poultry, which is not an easy thing to do because the story can become confused, and it's the journalist's job to clarify it.
The media have their critics, many of whom loiter on the internet. This video was posted by someone who considered last year's coverage of bird flu media hype. The song is called Don't Fear the Reaper, the implication being that the media did a grim job of scaring the masses. This time around, there have been occasional bouts of breathlessness.
Robin, fears of bird flu have now reached a fever pitch here.
And reports peppered with terminology borrowed from war zones.
The front line in the war against bird flu is a lab.
Tonight, ABC's Bob Jameson on how Rochester, New York became America's first line of defense.
Rochester, New York has been on the front line of the race to develop a bird flu vaccine.
Only some of these viruses, though, have the rare genetic changes that mean they can infect people.
But generally, the reporting has been more explanatory, more scientific, and less excitable than it was last year, when the first infected bird washed up on a British beach.
This prompted a hysterical reaction from the British press. We had news crews broadcasting live from the scene, national bulletins going live from the scene, helicopters flying overhead.
The PCR test breaks down those samples so they can be tested in very specific ways.
Now that we're coming back to the story, we're seeing it's being analyzed in a slightly different way.
Several times over. Much of the work is done in a biosafety cabinet like this one.
It's being analyzed with more responsibility, with more knowledge, and with a bit of caution, which I think is welcome.
Despite some improvement in the coverage, signs that the media are getting it right, this is the kind of story that mass media will always struggle with. Television news in particular likes to deal in certainties, or at the very least, in probabilities. And that's another problem with the bird flu story. Everyone knows that the big fear is if the virus mutates and can then be passed human to human through the air. But no one knows if that mutation will ever occur. We don't even know what the probability of that is. What we do know is, if it does happen, it'll be a huge story. Some stories we've been keeping an eye on, Listening Post News Bites. YouTube, the mother of all file-sharing sites, is about 100,000 clips smaller than it was a week ago because of a legal dispute with the U.S. media giant Viacom. Viacom owns MTV, Comedy Central, among others, and demanded that YouTube take down video clips that its many users post on the site after licensing negotiations between the two companies broke down. Viacom and some of the other media big boys, News Corp, Disney, and NBC Universal, have all talked amongst themselves of setting up a site to rival YouTube, but no deal there yet either. A message from China's blogging community to coffee megacorporation Starbucks. Feel the power. Recently, a newsreader in Beijing blogged that it was wrong to have a Starbucks outlet in the forbidden city of the capital. He said he liked the coffee but hated the location, saw it as cultural imperialism. 500,000 hits later, and the Chinese authorities have taken notice. They say they'll make a decision in June on whether the outlet stays or goes. Silvio Berlusconi is finding it's much harder to control the media now that he's no longer Italy's prime minister. A marital squabble between the media tycoon and his wife Veronica was splashed across the front pages of the newspaper La Repubblica last week. It started when Berlusconi refused to apologize to his wife for flirting with a couple of showgirls at a TV awards ceremony. His wife then sent a letter to the left-wing paper demanding a public apology. It went to the front page, then was broadcast around the world. Berlusconi replied with his own open letter, groveled for, and apparently got, forgiveness. Paris Hilton made her name on a reality TV show, and she recently learned that the real world is also wired for video. The socialite is mired in an internet row after comments from a home party video surfaced on the web. On it, Hilton said some things that gay rights and anti-racism leaders have taken issue with. Here at the Listening Post, we like to drop in on state-run television from time to time just to see how they're behaving. This week, we're in North Korea, where government TV stations pump out a steady diet of military muscle flexing and Kim Jong-il propaganda. You have to admit, it's very well choreographed. After the break, news value is in the eyes of the beholder, the disagreement over these images from Iraq.